The sun hasn't fully cleared the tree line yet, and already the freight cars are rolling past. They're close enough that you can feel them in your chest before you hear them. This is Seneca Road on the edge of Eugene, Oregon. Tents, tarps, bicycles leaning against chain link, warehouses on one side, active railroad tracks on the other, and then, in the middle of it all, something that looks completely out of place. A two-story house, not a tent, not a tarp stretched over poles, a house, real double front doors. Arched windows with wooden frames, a small porch with a wooden deck, and inside a staircase leading to an upstairs sleeping loft with a real bed. Here's the part that makes this story hard to forget. The house cost nothing in materials. A man named Todd built it himself, piece by piece, using salvaged materials he carried on a bicycle and cart, and he built it on land he doesn't own, land that a railroad company could reclaim. So how does a man who had been without a home for 17 years build a two-story house from almost nothing? Why did he build it there? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what happens when the people who own the land decide they want it back? This is the story of Todd's house, and the 17 years that came before the first nail ever went in. Todd is a Eugene native. He's asked reporters to leave his last name out of the story, and out of respect for that, we'll simply call him Todd. He had been unhoused since 2007, 17 years, 17 winters, 17 fire seasons, 17 years of never knowing housing security in the way most of us take for granted. But Todd wasn't someone who had never known how to build things. He grew up around tools. His father taught him landscaping and construction, practical skills like reading a stud wall, weatherproofing a seam, and making something stand straight with whatever happened to be available. For a time, both father and son worked at Lane Plywood, a mill that closed in 1997 and put roughly 200 people out of work in one afternoon. For most people, that closure is a small footnote in Eugene's economic history. For Todd, it was part of a much longer chain of events. Eventually, Todd lost his housing. The city offered shelter. He turned it down, and his explanation was surprisingly simple. He said, "I just got tired of it. I wanted to be able to hang something up." Think about that for a moment. After years without a stable home, he wasn't talking about a mansion. He wasn't even talking about a perfect apartment. He wanted a wall, a nail, a hook, something that belonged to him. And that tiny wish became the starting point for something nobody would have expected. Todd didn't build this house in a weekend. He built it the only way he could, slowly. No truck, no construction crew, no budget. Just one set of hands, years of practical knowledge, and whatever other people had thrown away. A sheet of plywood might come from behind a construction site. A window might be something somebody was replacing. A roll of black plastic tarp might have been intended for a job site rather than a home. Todd would strap the material onto a bicycle and cart and pedal it back to the camp, one load at a time, then another, and another, until a pile of discarded materials began to look like a building. He later described it simply, he spent a lot of time salvaging things and packing them on his bike and cart, a little bit at a time. But look at what those little trips eventually became. 2 stories, plywood walls, black tarp used to weatherproof the structure against Oregon rain, a small porch with a real wooden deck, double front doors on real hinges, and arched windows with genuine wooden frames. Those details matter, because if Todd had only wanted somewhere to crawl into at night, there were easier ways to do it. He was building something that looked like a home. Inside, a wooden staircase leads upstairs to a loft with a bed and blankets, keeping him off the damp ground. Downstairs serves as both workshop and living space. There are shelves of canned goods, a space heater, a small TV and monitor, a red patterned chair, clothing, tools, and something almost unexpectedly ordinary, a row of Hot Wheels toy cars, tiny toys sitting on a shelf in a place where almost everything else is about survival. And suddenly, the house feels less like a structure made from scrap. It feels like someone's home. City officials who later inspected the property from the outside said in almost so many words that it looked as though it could pass for a legal accessory dwelling unit. Think about the contradiction. A small home that looked legitimate from the street, built entirely by hand, for $0 in materials, by a man living in a homeless encampment, on somebody else's land, and that last detail is where the story changes. The house sits inside what people call Seneca Camp, a large encampment along Seneca Road, directly beside active railroad tracks and warehouses. The land belongs to Union Pacific Railroad, not the city, not the county, a private freight company's property. And that one fact changes everything. Todd didn't just build a house from nothing. He built it on ground where he had no legal claim to stay, no lease, no ownership, no guarantee that the house would still be there tomorrow. As of March 2024, Lane County counted at least 3,532 people without housing, with 68% having no shelter at all. Seneca Camp is only one small part of that larger problem. Todd's house is only one structure among tents and tarps. But it stands out because it looks like something familiar. It looks like somebody's home, because to Todd, it is. The strange part is that it is sitting on perhaps the one kind of land where a home was never supposed to be. There's something Todd said that, to me, gets to the heart of the entire story. He said, "There's a certain part of the world that's put behind me. I don't have to deal with it anymore." What does that mean when you're sitting inside a house with no address on land you don't own? It means he had finally created a barrier between himself and the outside world. The wind could still blow, the Oregon rain could still come, the railroad trains could still shake the ground. But there was now a door that closed, a porch, a staircase, a bed upstairs, a place where he could put something and expect it to still be there when he came back. For 17 years, Todd had lived without that kind of privacy and permanence. Then, one bicycle load at a time, he built a small piece of it back. Not because somebody handed him a home, because nobody did. And that is why this isn't really a story about plywood or railroad property. It's a story about what the word home means when almost everything else has been taken away. So, what does life inside Todd's house actually look like? Let's imagine one ordinary morning based on what has been documented at the site. Todd wakes upstairs in the loft, off the ground, and away from the damp that can soak through a tent floor overnight. He comes down the wooden staircase he built himself. If he had fuel, the space heater may have been running through the night. Below him are the things that make the place feel lived in: canned food, tools, clothing, a television, and those little Hot Wheels cars on the shelf. Outside, Seneca Camp is already waking up. Other tents, other tarps, bicycles being checked and repaired before people head out. This isn't one man alone in the wilderness. It's a community assembled from whatever people could gather, one shelter at a time. And then the trains come. Freight cars pass close enough to shake the ground under the porch. Imagine living beside that sound every day. At first, you notice every train. Eventually, it becomes part of the background, like traffic on a highway. Except this highway is made of steel, and it runs directly beside the place you call home. For Todd, the house isn't comfortable because the surroundings are comfortable. It's comfortable because there is finally something between him and those surroundings. But there was one problem Todd couldn't build his way around. The city inspected the structure, and what officials found was a long list of violations. Eugene's land use supervisor, Reed Verner, identified problems involving walkway and front yard measurements, fire code, electrical code, and height limits. In other words, the house may have looked like a small home from the outside, but it wasn't a permitted home. And to be fair, the safety argument is real. A hand-built 2-story structure with a space heater, wiring that was never inspected, and no formal fire code review can create genuine risks. Building codes exist for reasons. A fire doesn't care how resourceful the person inside the building was. But here's where the story becomes uncomfortable. The same standards that protect people in permitted housing were now being enforced against a man who had built his own shelter because he didn't have a permitted place to live. So, what should happen? Should the city overlook safety rules because Todd is homeless? Obviously, that creates risks, but should a man be left with no realistic housing option and then punished when he creates one himself? That's the tension at the center of this story. And there isn't an easy answer. Then there was the land. The ground underneath every board of Todd's house belonged to Union Pacific Railroad, and Todd had no lease. When a local news crew asked Union Pacific whether the company knew about Seneca Camp and what it planned to do, the railroad did not provide a substantive answer. No clear acknowledgement of the camp, no timeline, no specific comment on Todd's house, just silence. And sometimes silence can be more frightening than a notice. An eviction notice gives you a date. It gives you something concrete. Todd didn't have that. He had uncertainty. A company could decide to act later, and he wouldn't necessarily know until the decision had already been made. For a man who had spent 17 years trying to create one stable place, the most frightening part may not have been losing the house. It may have been never knowing when he might lose it. Then the threat became real. Just before a January ice storm hit Eugene police issued trespassing citations to 9 people at Seneca Camp after a request from Union Pacific. Todd was one of them. Think about the timing. An ice storm was coming, the kind of weather where shelter isn't a luxury, it's survival. And suddenly, the people living at the camp were facing a formal legal warning that they could be removed from the land. By April 2024, reporting confirmed that Todd and 8 others were still living under that same threat. Months later, there was still no clear resolution, no final answer, just the possibility of eviction hanging over the camp. Then, in July of that year, footage surfaced online showing a tense confrontation involving homelessness advocates, Eugene police, and Union Pacific employees during a cleanup operation near the camp. Whatever window Todd had been living in was getting smaller, and now the question was no longer simply, can Todd keep his house? It was, how long does he have before someone decides he can't? But there is another part of Eugene's story that is easy to miss. There is an alternative. A nonprofit called Community Supported Shelters builds small, private, weatherproof Conestoga huts and organizes them into managed villages. The idea is simple: give people an individual shelter. Give them a door, give them some privacy, give them a little independence. The organization's operations director, Tabitha Eck, described group shelters as highly institutionalized and argued that individual shelters can produce better outcomes. She said the program moves people into HUD-approved housing at 3 times the success rate of other providers. That matters because it shows something important. The choice isn't necessarily between unsafe homemade house and nothing. There are models designed to give people private shelter while still providing structure and safety. The problem is scale. Community-supported shelters can only build so many huts, as quickly as its funding allows, and Lane County has thousands of people without shelter. Todd didn't wait for a program. He couldn't. He built with what he had: a bicycle, a cart, salvaged materials, and the construction knowledge his father had passed down to him. So who is the villain here? The more you look at the story, the harder that question becomes. The city has a responsibility to make sure buildings don't collapse or catch fire. Union Pacific has a legal right to its own property. Todd has a right to want somewhere safe to sleep. All 3 statements can be true at the same time. And yet something still feels broken, because the fastest and cheapest shelter solution available to Todd was the one he created himself: a 2-story structure, built for $0 in materials, built by one man, built because the official alternatives were not available to him in time. Todd didn't discover some clever loophole. He used the skills he had. His father taught him how to build. The world had stopped giving him a place to use those skills, so he used them anyway. Maybe that's the part worth remembering. Even after 17 years without a home, Todd had not stopped being capable. He had not stopped wanting ordinary things: a door, a bed, a place to hang something, a few Hot Wheels on a shelf. Things that most people would never think twice about. Things that can become incredibly valuable when you have gone years without them. As of the most recent reporting available for this story, Todd's house was still standing at Seneca Camp. and still under threat. There was no confirmed resolution, no later report establishing exactly what happened next. And that leaves us with a question I can't honestly answer. Is Todd's little two-story house still standing today? I don't know. Nobody had published a definitive update in the reporting this story is based on. And maybe that's one reason the story stays with you. Because there is no neat ending, no final scene where everything is fixed, just a house that one man built, a piece of land he doesn't own, and a future that remained uncertain. So go back to the image we started with: a railroad, a camp, and a two-story house that looks like it belongs in a quiet neighborhood somewhere else. 17 years without a home. A father's construction knowledge passed down long before either of them knew where it would lead. A bicycle, a cart, and one load after another until discarded materials became walls, windows, doors, a staircase, and a bed. Todd didn't have a home handed to him. He built one. Not because he wanted something extravagant, because he wanted something ordinary. A place to sleep, a door that closed, a wall where he could hang something, and a few things that were his. Whether the world lets him keep that house is another question. And that's what makes Todd's story so difficult to forget. If this story stayed with you, that's the purpose of American Hideaways. Every week, we look for another person who refused to disappear, someone who built, survived, adapted, or simply found a way to create a life in a place most people would never expect. There are more people like Todd out there than any headline will ever tell you. Subscribe if you want to see the next one.